Now, what interests me here is that nationally we have a big problem with only one of those three forms of schooling. There are few things more selective than professional sport, but it's far more socially acceptable to get paid to be a footballer as a sixth former than it is for your parents to pay for you to do your A-levels. And to add to the national doublethink, we're fine with paying fees for selective universities and even with selective state sixth form colleges, which Wellington and Eton are about to become. It's also socially acceptable and increasingly necessary to pay for education if your child has special needs. We know this because Keir Starmer has already announced that those with a statement will be exempted from VAT. Good luck getting a statement of those needs, by the way, given the austerity measures which have hit social services. And the reason why those with special needs are coming to independent schools, and they account for a fifth of the pupils in our sector, is the same reason why many of those who are severely able to do so. Their needs are not being met by the mainstream. And state funding is part of the problem here. When we ask parents why they choose us, the single biggest reason they give is inspiring teaching. And securing those inspiring teachers with relevant degrees in their subjects costs money. The state sector crisis in teacher recruitment and retention can only be solved by serious money, and VAT on a majority of schools is not going to fix it. And it is the case that private school fees were effectively double state school spending levels in the decade between 2009 to 2020. And it sounds damning. And yes, Melissa's right that there has been inflation of fees since 2003. But since no one, to my knowledge, has been in our schools for 21 years, it's difficult to tell whether they've been forced out by that or not. Also, having been in senior leadership in 3 different independent schools during those 10 years, I can tell you that those fee increases were not driven by a desire to gold plate the swimming pool, because none of those schools has one. The major outgoing is staff costs, and the combination of rising wages and the accompanying teachers' pension increases during those years accounts for more than 2/3 of those schools' spending. As Fraser has noted, most independent schools are small and therefore vulnerable, and they're not the cliché. Last summer, the NFER reported that state sector teacher salaries would need to rise by 16.5% in order for real wages to make good the pay lag, which is now 10 years old in state schools. And the cost of that pay rise alone, if it were to be implemented next year, more than £4 billion. The very optimistic £1.5 billion forecast revenue from VAT is a punitive drop in the ocean. Nearly £60 billion is planned to be spent on state schools next year alone, of which VAT is not going to be transformative.
Over the course of the evening, I hope to persuade you that not only do private schools dodge their social responsibility through their VAT exemption and charitable status, and let's be honest, the whole charitable status thing is a con, because providing the children of people who can afford tens of thousands of pounds a year an inflated chance of going to Oxford is not a charitable endeavour. I think we can all agree on that. But as well as finicking over tax status, I really do hope to persuade you tonight that private schools as a whole are corrosive to our society. And they're corrosive to our society because they rob other kids, working class kids, middle income kids, of opportunity. They're corrosive because they segregate children on the basis of class. And because the wealthy have the option of going private, private schools have facilitated the 14-year-long austerity experiment which has systematically underfunded the education of the 93% of British children who attend state schools, who don't go to independent schools. So quickly, show of hands, who here believes in the principle of meritocracy? Who thinks that one's talents should dictate how far you go in life? Great, you're all on my side. Because private schools don't operate on the basis of meritocracy, they operate on the basis of money. It is money and not merit that determines how far you go. There is a quid pro quo. If you hand over the equivalent of half the nation's average wage every year at a minimum, if you hand that sum over on fees, your child has an increased chance of ending up as a part of other elite institutions. And to be fair, the numbers, as Fraser reminded us, do back it up. 7% of the UK population attends private school for secondary education, and yet these pupils end up having a stranglehold on British public life. They produce 74% of senior judges, 59% of permanent secretaries in the civil service. They produce 54% of top journalists, and to date, 85% of British prime ministers. And I don't think that anyone would look at media or politics and thinks, yeah, we're really getting the best and brightest. Now, I want to talk about class segregation. And I do believe that segregation is the correct word. Because if we were having a debate about schools which were segregated on the basis of race, but don't worry, 10% of the places, or maybe even 20% of the places, are theoretically available to Black and Asian school children, we wouldn't be defending that. We would rightly be outraged. We would say that is deeply unfair. You are encoding an unfair practice at the heart of your institution. But here we are, debating whether or not it's right to segregate the best resourced and most well-networked schools in our society on the basis of class. And honestly, that makes me despair. As mentioned earlier, I went to a comprehensive girls' school in North London for secondary, and it was truly diverse. Doesn't mean it was always easy, but it did mean that it was never dull. The pupil intake, it ranged from girls who were solidly middle class to girls whose parents were mechanics to girls who were in and out of the care system, girls who were refugees. And I will never ever forget the time when in year 7, I made a friend and I brought her back for tea, and it turned out that my mum was her social worker. And I'm sure that for many parents, that would fill you with dread and terror. The idea that you're sending your kid to attend a school and other children may have come from literal war zones, both at home and abroad. But retaining a system of social apartheid where kids from disadvantaged backgrounds don't get to breathe the same rarefied air as kids from more privileged ones, that is the thing that I find terrifying. Because what I learned is that kids from those tougher backgrounds, they have so much to give. Because I learned a lot about life every day. And I learned a lot about life from the girl who'd come from Somaliland, and she was having to learn English. Both the Queen's English that she learnt in her English lessons and the North London kind, which we were teaching her in the playground. And we know from study after study that socio-economically integrated schools produce better results for disadvantaged pupils. And I think it's good. I think it's an inherently good thing when people from challenging backgrounds aren't abandoned by those from more stable or more affluent upbringings. Because what kind of message do you think it sends when you say that those kids, I mean also kids like me, were simply too dangerous, too rambunctious, and too poor to share a classroom with? But in addition to that, I think that diverse state schools, they produce better learning environments than the socially impoverished experience at fee-paying schools. I think that you learn more about the world, you learn more about yourself, you learn more about the people that you are, I think, privileged to share a country with. And I don't think it's right that for many amongst those 74% of privately educated judges, maybe the first time they encounter someone who went through the care system is when they're sentencing them.